The moment she steps onto that stage with his rival and 3 light-eyed children by her side, his perfectly composed face goes white as he realizes the magnitude of what he destroyed. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. Rain streaked down the floor-to-ceiling windows of the exclusive Lakeview condominium in Chicago, creating rivulets that mirrored the tears Gabriella Johnson was desperately trying to hold back. Through the panoramic glass, the city lights blurred into a kaleidoscope of colors against the stormy October night. In her trembling hands, she held 2 objects that would forever divide her life into before and after: a positive pregnancy test and her husband's cell phone. The message glowed on the screen, sent just 3 hours ago. "Congratulations on your Businessman of the Year award, darling. Can't wait to celebrate without Gabriella around." It was from Stephanie Parker, the marketing executive from a rival company. "She still doesn't suspect anything? We need to resolve this soon." Gabriella scrolled through the message thread with numb fingers, each text revealing months of betrayal, plans for a future together, and the most painful: "Gabriella was useful when I was starting out, but now she's an obstacle to where I need to go. No class, no connections. You understand?" She placed the phone on the imported Italian white sofa that Mason had been so proud of when they purchased it. 2 years in this glass and steel sanctuary, and she had never felt less at home than she did tonight. The sleek, minimalist design that had once seemed so sophisticated now felt as cold and unforgiving as the truth she had discovered. The sound of the elevator doors opening announced Mason's arrival. At 35, Mason Reynolds was the epitome of success: perfectly trimmed blonde hair, custom-tailored suit, and the Patek Philippe watch that cost more than Gabriella's car. As CEO of Reynolds Enterprises, his face had graced the covers of business magazines, always with that confident smile that had once made her heart race. "I'm pregnant," Gabriella said simply as he walked into the living room. The silence that followed was deafening. Mason showed no surprise, no joy, no emotion whatsoever. His blue eyes, once so captivating, now seemed glacial as they assessed her. "That complicates things," he finally said, loosening his tie. "I had planned a different conversation for tonight." "About Stephanie?" Gabriella asked, revealing his phone with the messages still displayed. Mason's mask of civility collapsed. His jaw tightened, and his eyes narrowed. "You invaded my privacy? Typical of someone from your background." The word hung in the air between them. Background. As if her upbringing in the Bronx was a disease he had tolerated for too long. "How long?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Does it matter?" Mason strode past her to the bar, pouring himself 2 fingers of scotch. "This marriage has been over for months. Stephanie understands what I need for the next phase of my career." Gabriella felt her world tilt on its axis. "Next phase? I thought we were building a life together. We talked about children. We talked about a lot of things," Mason replied dismissively. "Things change. People evolve. At least, some of us do." He disappeared into their bedroom, returning moments later with an empty suitcase that he placed on the sofa beside her. "What are you doing?" Gabriella asked, though the answer was painfully clear. "Being practical. You need to leave tonight." Gabriella stared at him in disbelief. "I'm pregnant, Mason. With your child." "So you claim?" His voice was cold, clinical. "Even if it's true, it doesn't change anything." As she watched in stunned silence, Mason began methodically selecting her clothes from their shared closet, folding them with the same precision he applied to business presentations, placing them in the suitcase. "You can't just throw me out. This is my home too," Gabriella protested, following him to the closet. "Actually, I can. The condo is in my name. The prenup you signed is quite clear about property division." He tossed her hairbrush into the suitcase. "You're an obstacle to my success, Gabriella. You've always been just a girl from the Bronx trying to pass as someone important." Each word cut deeper than the last. Gabriella watched as the man she had loved for 3 years, married for 2, systematically dismantled their life together with cold efficiency. "Stephanie is the kind of woman who complements my image. You, with your natural hair and humble origins, never belonged in my world." Mason zipped the first suitcase closed and retrieved a second one. "You never will." "How can you be so cruel?" Gabriella's voice broke as she placed her hands protectively over her still flat stomach. "I loved you. I supported you when Reynolds Enterprises was struggling. And I'm grateful for that chapter," Mason replied, his tone suggesting anything but gratitude. "But chapters end, Gabriella. Ours has." 3 hours later, Gabriella stood on the sidewalk outside the building she had called home, rain soaking through her coat, mixing with the tears streaming down her face. The doorman avoided her gaze as Mason instructed him that she should no longer be permitted entry to the building. She watched through the glass doors as her husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, walked back to the elevator without a backward glance. With 2 suitcases, pregnant, and with nowhere to go, Gabriella pulled out her phone with trembling fingers. The screen was cracked. It had fallen during their argument when Mason had grabbed her arm perhaps harder than he intended, or perhaps exactly as hard as he intended. "Tasha, it's me," she said when her college friend answered. "I'm sorry to call so late, but I need help." At 2 in the morning, Tasha Williams opened the door to her small South Side apartment, her eyes widening at the sight of her drenched friend. "My God, Gabi, what happened?" Gabriella collapsed into her arms, the weight of the evening finally breaking her composure completely. In the days that followed, Gabriella alternated between tears and numbness, lying on Tasha's worn couch, compulsively checking social media. Tasha brought her tea she couldn't drink and food she couldn't eat, concern deepening the lines around her friend's eyes. "He can't just throw you out like that," Tasha insisted. "You have rights. We should call a lawyer." But Gabriella had seen the prenuptial agreement, had signed it, believing at the time that it was just a formality, that their love was real and lasting. The document left her with nothing, a generosity, according to Mason, given that she had come into the marriage with nothing but her marketing degree from the University of Chicago, which he had always called too basic for someone with real ambition. 2 weeks after being abandoned, Gabriella's phone pinged with a notification. Mason appeared in Forbes, his arm around Stephanie Parker, the article announcing his new fiancée and the new marketing director of Reynolds Enterprises. The photo showed them at a charity gala, champagne glasses raised, Stephanie's diamond engagement ring prominently displayed. When Gabriella finally consulted an obstetrician recommended by a community clinic that Tasha had found, another shock awaited. The doctor moved the ultrasound wand over her belly, then paused, frowning slightly. "Ms. Johnson, I'm seeing something interesting here," she said, adjusting the screen. "You're not carrying 1 baby, you're carrying 3. Triplets." Sitting alone in the ultrasound room, Tasha had to work, and there was no husband to hold her hand. Gabriella watched 3 tiny heartbeats flickering on the screen. 3 lives, abandoned before they were even born. The weight of Mason's rejection multiplied by 3. The following months were a descent into hell. The unilateral divorce agreement that Mason sent through his lawyer offered a pittance, a generosity, according to the accompanying letter, since the prenup she had signed left her entitled to nothing. Her credit card was canceled without warning when she tried to buy prenatal vitamins. The marketing education from the University of Chicago that Mason had dismissed as too basic failed to open doors in the elite circles where he had introduced her. By her 6th month of pregnancy, Gabriella was working 2 jobs, morning shifts at a coffee shop and afternoons as an administrative assistant at a small accounting firm. Every step was a challenge, every penny counted. The tiny studio apartment she managed to rent in Queens barely had space for a bed, let alone 3 cribs. One evening, returning from work with swollen feet and an aching back, she passed a newsstand displaying Mason and Stephanie on the cover of Business Insider. The perfect power couple. How Mason and Stephanie Reynolds are revolutionizing the tech market. In the photo, they smiled aboard their yacht, champagne in hand, while Gabriella could barely afford milk. That night was rock bottom. Sitting on the floor of her tiny bathroom, Gabriella cried until she had no tears left, her hands protective over her swollen belly. "I'm sorry, my loves. You deserve better than this." But then, something shifted. It wasn't a dramatic moment like in movies, just a small spark of determination amid the despair. The next morning, Gabriella woke with a clarity she hadn't felt in months. She opened her old laptop and began researching. First, free online courses in business development. Then, support programs for single mothers. Next, a detailed 5-year plan. "No one will ever define my worth again," she promised the 3 lives growing inside her. "I'll build an empire that will make Mason Reynolds choke on his own words." 2 months later, Aiden, Sophia, and Olivia were born healthy, though premature. Alone in the delivery room, Gabriella made a vow to her children. "The man who abandoned us thought he was condemning us to insignificance. He was wrong about everything." That rainy October night, as she watched her world crumble, Gabriella couldn't have imagined that in 5 years, she would be the one dismantling Mason Reynolds' empire, with the same cold calculation he had used to discard her. 6 months after that fateful night when Mason had cast her out into the rain, Gabriella struggled to pull herself out of bed at 4:30 in the morning. Her swollen belly, now housing 3 growing babies, made every movement a deliberate act. The small studio apartment in Queens creaked as she moved around in the pre-dawn darkness, careful not to disturb the neighbors through the paper-thin walls. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, a mantra that had become necessary for survival. The subway ride to the coffee shop was particularly brutal this morning. Standing for 40 minutes as the train lurched between stations, Gabriella gripped the handrail with whitened knuckles, ignoring the pointed looks from seated passengers who apparently couldn't see that she was pregnant, or chose not to. By 5:45, she had arrived at Morningside Brews, the small cafe near Columbia University where she had secured a job 3 months ago. Her uniform, a polo shirt stretched tight across her growing belly and khaki pants that no longer buttoned properly, was already damp with sweat from the commute. "You're cutting it close, Gabriella," said Frank, the manager, checking his watch with exaggerated concern. "We open in 15 minutes and the pastries aren't even arranged." "Sorry," she murmured, tying her apron around what remained of her waist. The F train was delayed again. "Not my problem," Frank replied, his eyes drifting to her stomach with barely concealed annoyance. "Just move faster. I'm not paying you to waddle around." By 7:30, the morning rush was in full swing. Columbia professors and students lined up for their caffeine fix, many with eyes glued to phones, barely acknowledging Gabriella's existence as she called out their complicated orders. "Grande triple shot soy latte with vanilla for Steve," she called, placing the cup on the counter while suppressing a wince. The pain in her lower back had been constant for weeks now, but today it felt sharper. "This isn't what I ordered," said Steve, a regular who had never once looked her in the eye. "I said hazelnut, not vanilla." "I'm sorry, I'll remake it right away," Gabriella said, forcing a smile. "Jesus, it's not that hard to get right," Steve muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. As she turned to remake the drink, another customer grew impatient. "Excuse me, I've been waiting 10 minutes for my Americano." "Coming right up, sir," Gabriella replied, feeling a trickle of sweat run down her back. The morning wore on in a blur of demands, complaints, and the relentless ache in her feet and back. At 11:30, during a rare lull, Gabriella finally had a chance to sit down in the back room for her 15-minute break. She had just closed her eyes when Frank appeared in the doorway. "Table 3 needs clearing and there's a spill by the condiment station," he said, not bothering to hide his irritation. "Your break can wait." As Gabriella heaved herself up, a sharp pain shot through her abdomen, causing her to gasp and clutch the wall for support. Please, she said. Just 5 minutes. The doctor said I need to rest periodically. Frank's expression hardened. Look, I took a chance hiring you in your condition. If you can't handle the job, there are plenty who can. The threat hung in the air, clear and cruel. Gabriella nodded and shuffled past him, grabbing a rag to clean the spill. As she bent awkwardly to wipe the floor, a customer carrying a large coffee turned abruptly, bumping into her. The hot liquid splashed across her arm and chest. "Watch it!" the man snapped, as if she had been at fault. Gabriella bit her lip, blinking back tears that threatened to betray her. "I'm sorry, sir," she managed, the skin on her arm already turning an angry red. At 1:30, her shift finally ended, giving her exactly 30 minutes to change clothes in the public restroom at the park before starting her second job as an administrative assistant at Greenfield Accounting. She splashed water on her face, trying to revive her exhausted features, and changed into a slightly more professional outfit, a stretched navy maternity dress she'd found at a thrift store. By 2 o'clock, she was at her desk, answering phones and filing paperwork. The office was small, with fluorescent lighting that gave everyone a sickly pallor. Her desk chair had a broken adjustment lever, forcing her to sit at an uncomfortable angle that made her back scream in protest. At 4:15, Mr. Greenfield called her into his office, his expression grave behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Gabriella, we need to discuss your situation," he began, folding his hands on the desk. "Your condition is becoming a concern." "I'm still able to perform all my duties," she said quickly, hands protectively covering her belly. "Perhaps, but clients have commented. It's not the professional image we aim to project." He cleared his throat. "After your maternity leave, we may need to reassess your position here." The message was clear. Don't expect a job to return to. Earlier that same week, Gabriella had attended an interview for a marketing position at a mid-size company. The interview had gone well until the hiring manager's eyes had drifted to her obvious pregnancy. "When exactly are you due?" he had asked, his interest in her qualifications evaporating. "In about 3 months," she had answered honestly. "But I'm planning to return to work after. We need someone who can commit long-term without interruptions," he had interrupted, ending the interview shortly thereafter. That evening, Gabriella dragged herself up the 4 flights of stairs to her apartment, each step a mountain to climb. The elevator had been out of service for weeks, and the landlord showed no interest in fixing it. Her tiny studio welcomed her with its familiar problems. The refrigerator that hummed too loudly, the radiator that clanged at random intervals, and the thin walls that shared every argument from the neighboring apartments. She eased herself onto the single bed, the only substantial piece of furniture besides a small table and folding chair. Kicking off her swollen feet, she massaged them gingerly, wincing at the tender spots. Pulling her worn notebook from her bag, Gabriella reviewed her budget. The numbers refused to cooperate no matter how she arranged them. After rent, utilities, and food, there was barely anything left, and soon there would be 3 babies needing diapers, formula, and clothing. Opening her laptop, she began searching for sales on baby essentials, the reality hitting her anew. She would need 3 of everything. 3 cribs wouldn't even fit in this room. Where would they sleep? How would she afford childcare when she returned to work? During a prenatal checkup the previous week, her doctor had expressed concern about her blood pressure and the dark circles under her eyes. "You need to reduce stress and rest more," he had advised, seemingly unaware of the impossibility of his recommendation. "I'm working 2 jobs, doctor," she had replied. "Rest isn't really an option." He had frowned, making a note in her chart. "These babies need you healthy, Ms. Johnson. High blood pressure increases the risk of premature birth." A call from her mother in the Bronx had only added to her stress. "I told you he was too good to be true," Elena Johnson had said, her voice heavy with "I told you so" satisfaction. "Men like that don't marry girls like us without an angle." Gabriella had ended the call quickly, unable to bear her mother's vindication on top of everything else. At the supermarket that evening, lightheadedness had struck suddenly as she compared prices on pasta. The floor seemed to tilt, and she found herself sitting on the linoleum, a concerned stranger helping her up. "Are you okay, honey? Should I call someone?" the woman had asked, her kind face swimming in Gabriella's vision. "I'm fine," Gabriella had insisted, embarrassed. "Just got dizzy for a moment." Walking home with her meager groceries, she had passed a newsstand displaying the latest issue of Business Insider. The cover made her stop cold. The Power Couple: How Mason and Stephanie Reynolds Are Revolutionizing the Tech Market. There they were, champagne glasses raised aboard a gleaming yacht, the sunlight catching Stephanie's enormous diamond ring. Mason looked tanned and carefree, his arm possessively around his new wife's waist, the perfect picture of success and happiness, while Gabriella calculated whether she could afford both milk and eggs this week. That night, sitting on the floor of her tiny bathroom, the contrast between her reality and Mason's carefree existence finally broke her. Sobs racked her body as she cradled her swollen belly. "I'm sorry, my loves," she whispered to her unborn children. "You deserve so much better than this." The tears continued until there were none left, leaving behind a hollow emptiness. But as the dawn light filtered through the small bathroom window, something shifted in Gabriella's eyes. The despair began to harden into something else: determination. The next morning, Gabriella woke before her alarm, a strange clarity having replaced the fog of hopelessness. She opened her laptop and began to research with focus and purpose she hadn't felt in months. First, she searched for free online business development courses. Then, support programs specifically designed for single mothers. Next, she created a spreadsheet titled 5-Year Plan for Financial Independence. While observing her sleeping children growing inside her through the thin fabric of her nightgown, Gabriella Johnson didn't know that this promise would be the first brick of an empire that would one day make Mason Reynolds choke on his own words. With newfound determination, Gabriella sat at her tiny kitchen table, the morning light casting long shadows across her laptop screen. Her fingers moved purposefully across the keyboard, bookmarking resources, signing up for newsletters about business opportunities, and mapping out a detailed plan that stretched 5 years into a future she could barely imagine. Step 1. Complete online certification in digital marketing, she murmured, creating a folder titled New Beginning. The discipline that had earned her a scholarship to the University of Chicago years ago resurfaced, channeled now into meticulous research and planning. Each morning before her shift at the coffee shop, Gabriella dedicated an hour to her courses. Each evening after returning from the accounting firm, she studied until her eyes burned. The routine gave structure to days otherwise filled with aching feet and dismissive customers. Her spreadsheet grew more detailed: financial goals by quarter, skills to acquire, potential business ideas that would allow her flexibility as a mother. Between entries, she'd rest her hands on her swollen belly, feeling the movements of the 3 lives depending entirely on her resilience. "We're going to make it," she promised them during these quiet moments. Somehow. 2 weeks into her new routine, Gabriella felt the first contractions while filing papers at Greenfield Accounting. She ignored them initially, attributing the discomfort to Braxton Hicks. By evening, however, the pain had intensified to unmistakable labor, 2 months earlier than her due date. "Tasha," she gasped into her phone, doubled over on her bed. "I think the babies are coming." The taxi ride to the hospital passed in a blur of fear and pain. At 28 weeks, the triplets would be dangerously premature. Each contraction brought waves of terror, not just for their survival, but for how she would manage if they needed extended hospital care. "Single mother, 28 weeks, triplets," the admitting nurse announced efficiently as Gabriella was wheeled into labor and delivery. The attending physician's frown deepened as he reviewed her chart. "Your blood pressure is concerning, Ms. Johnson. We'll try to delay delivery, but we need to prepare you for the possibility that these babies may come today." Despite medication to slow her labor, by midnight, it was clear the triplets would not wait. The delivery room buzzed with a team assembled for high-risk premature births. Neonatologists, nurses, respiratory specialists. "Where's your partner?" a nurse asked kindly, helping Gabriella into position. "There isn't one," she answered through gritted teeth. No hand to hold, no reassuring voice to coach her breathing. Just Gabriella, alone, bringing 3 new lives into a world that had already shown them callous indifference. The hours that followed tested every ounce of her strength. Between contractions, Gabriella thought of Mason in his penthouse with Stephanie, oblivious to the children about to enter the world carrying his DNA. The anger fueled her when her body threatened to give out. At 4:17 in the morning, Aiden Reynolds Johnson arrived, weighing just 2 pounds 3 ounces, his cry more kitten-like than human. 7 minutes later came Sophia, smaller still at 1 pound 15 ounces. Olivia followed last, the strongest at 2 pounds 5 ounces with a determined wail that echoed her mother's spirit. The babies were whisked immediately to incubators, their tiny bodies connected to monitors and tubes. Gabriella caught only glimpses, translucent skin, miniature fingers, faces obscured by breathing apparatus. "Can I touch them?" she asked weakly. "Not yet," the neonatologist explained gently. "Their immune systems are extremely vulnerable, but you can see them once they're stabilized in the NICU." Alone in the recovery room, physically depleted and emotionally raw, Gabriella made a solemn vow to the children she had barely glimpsed. "The man who abandoned us thought he was condemning us to insignificance," she whispered into the sterile air. "He was wrong about everything." The weeks that followed established new routines centered around the neonatal intensive care unit. Gabriella learned medical terminology she never wanted to know: bradycardia, apnea monitors, gavage feeding. She pumped breast milk religiously every 3 hours, delivering the labeled bottles to the NICU nurses like precious cargo. Between NICU visits, she continued her online courses, sometimes completing assignments on her phone while sitting beside the incubators. The nurses marveled at her dedication, unaware that her studying wasn't just ambition, it was survival strategy. "Most parents find it hard to focus on anything during NICU stays," one nurse commented, watching Gabriella take notes during a digital marketing webinar while Aiden slept in his incubator. "I don't have the luxury of falling apart," Gabriella replied simply. At 6 weeks old, the triplets were finally stable enough to be held. The first time Gabriella cradled Sophia against her chest, a fragile bundle barely larger than her hand, the enormity of her responsibility crystallized. These 3 beings depended entirely on her strength, her resilience, her ability to create a future from ashes. "We're going home soon," she promised each baby during kangaroo care sessions, their skin against hers. "And then we're going to build something amazing together." After 73 days in the NICU, the triplets were discharged. Still small but fighters all 3, just like their mother. Gabriella's studio apartment, barely adequate for 1, now housed 4. She had arranged 3 second-hand bassinets in a semicircle around her bed, transforming the tiny kitchen table into a changing station. The reality of caring for 3 newborns alone quickly overshadowed any abstract business plans. Days and nights blurred into an endless cycle of feedings, diaper changes, and brief moments of sleep snatched between babies' needs. The pediatrician had prescribed a specialized formula to supplement her breast milk, adding another strain to her precarious budget. One particularly difficult night, with all 3 babies crying simultaneously and her milk supply diminishing from stress and exhaustion, Gabriella reached her breaking point. Sitting on the floor between the bassinets, tears streaming down her face, she wondered if she had been foolish to think she could do this alone. The next morning, an envelope arrived from a law firm representing Mason Reynolds. Inside was a formal notification acknowledging receipt of her birth announcement but officially declining paternity rights or responsibilities. Attached was a check for $50,000 and a confidentiality agreement requiring her never to publicly connect the children to Mason. Gabriella stared at the check, enough to ease her immediate financial crisis, to move to a larger apartment, to buy the necessities the babies needed. For 5 minutes, she considered cashing it. Then, methodically, she tore both the check and the confidentiality agreement into tiny pieces. Taking a deep breath, she opened her laptop and typed a response to Mason's attorneys. Mr. Reynolds' attempt to purchase his children's erasure from his life is rejected. No amount will suffice. They will know their worth, even if their father never did. That afternoon, Gabriella brought the triplets to their 2-month checkup in the second-hand stroller she'd found on Craigslist. As the pediatrician examined each baby, she noted their progress with approval. "They're fighters, Ms. Johnson. You're doing an exceptional job under difficult circumstances." "Thank you," Gabriella replied, the first genuine smile in weeks crossing her face. "We have big plans, the 4 of us." That evening, with the babies finally asleep, Gabriella reopened her 5-year plan spreadsheet. The rejection of Mason's money had clarified something. She wouldn't build her future on his guilt or obligation. She would build it on her own terms, her own talents, her own determination. She created 3 new documents: college funds for Aiden, Sophia, and Olivia. Into each, she deposited the first contribution, $25, nearly her last spare cash. It was symbolic, a promise of future prosperity she had no rational reason to believe in yet. In the months that followed, Gabriella established a routine that allowed her to care for the triplets while continuing her education. She completed her digital marketing certification with distinction, adding it to her resume alongside her University of Chicago degree. A neighbor, elderly Mrs. Rodriguez from apartment 4B, offered to watch the babies for a few hours each week, allowing Gabriella precious time to apply for scholarships and small business grants. "My children grew up long ago," Mrs. Rodriguez explained, cradling Olivia expertly. "These little ones bring life to these old hands." When the triplets were 5 months old, Gabriella received notification of her acceptance to a competitive MBA program with a full scholarship designated for single mothers. The program offered subsidized childcare and flexible scheduling, a lifeline she hadn't dared hope for. The day she received the acceptance letter, Gabriella sat on her bed surrounded by her 3 children, now plump and thriving despite their difficult start. "This is just the beginning," she told them as they cooed and grasped at the paper with tiny fingers. "First this degree, then our own company, then the world." As she watched her 3 children sleeping peacefully that evening, Gabriella had no idea that her refusal to accept Mason's silencing payment would be just the first move in a power chess game that would culminate in a public confrontation destined to shatter the carefully constructed reputation of Mason Reynolds. 1 year had passed since Gabriella had watched her tiny babies in the NICU, connected to tubes and monitors. Now, at 15 months old, the triplets were thriving bundles of energy. Aiden had recently discovered the joy of pulling himself up on furniture, his chubby legs wobbling with determination. Sophia, the smallest at birth, had developed an impressive set of lungs that she exercised whenever displeased. Olivia, always the most observant, studied everything with intense focus, her blue eyes, so painfully reminiscent of Mason's, taking in the world with quiet curiosity. Gabriella's alarm chimed at 5 in the morning, rousing her from precious few hours of sleep. The MBA program had proven as challenging as it was rewarding, requiring a delicate balance between motherhood, studies, and basic survival. Her desk in the corner of their small apartment was covered with textbooks, highlighters, and sticky notes, an island of academic ambition in a sea of baby toys and formula containers. This morning, she needed to finish a presentation for her Sustainable Business Practices class before the triplets woke up. Professor Winters had assigned a project exploring innovative energy solutions, and something about it had captured Gabriella's imagination. Between diaper changes and feedings, she'd fallen down a research rabbit hole about renewable energy storage, the critical missing piece in the green energy revolution. "The problem isn't generating solar power," she muttered to herself, typing rapidly. It's storing it efficiently for use when the sun isn't shining. By 6:30, Aiden's babbling signaled the end of her study time. Soon all three babies were awake, demanding breakfast and attention. As she prepared their oatmeal, Gabriella continued mentally working through her presentation ideas. Later that day, she stood before her classmates, the triplets safely in the university's subsidized childcare center for the afternoon. Her presentation slides showed a theoretical battery design using sustainable materials that could potentially double the storage capacity of current technologies. In conclusion, she finished, this approach could revolutionize how we implement renewable energy solutions across both residential and commercial applications. Professor Winters adjusted his glasses, his expression skeptical. Theoretically brilliant, Ms. Johnson, but impractical with current technology. The materials science isn't there yet. With respect, Professor, I disagree, Gabriella countered. These components exist. They just haven't been combined this way before. An interesting academic exercise, he conceded with a dismissive wave, but the market requires proven solutions, not theoretical ones. The familiar sting of dismissal followed her as she collected her notes. It was the same tone Mason had used when she'd suggested marketing improvements for Reynolds Enterprises, polite condescension masking the underlying message, "You're reaching beyond your station." That evening, after tucking the triplets into their cribs, Gabriella returned to her notes instead of starting her economics assignment. Something about Professor Winters' dismissal had ignited a familiar determination. She began refining calculations, researching material costs, and sketching improved designs. Night after night, this pattern continued, caring for the babies, attending classes, then working on her energy storage concept until exhaustion claimed her. Mrs. Rodriguez noticed the dark circles under Gabriella's eyes when she came to help with the triplets one afternoon. The elderly woman clucked her tongue in disapproval while expertly cradling Sophia. "You push yourself too hard, Chica," she said, rocking the baby. "When do you rest?" "I'll rest when we're secure," Gabriella replied, spreading her notes across the kitchen table while Aiden and Olivia played on a blanket nearby. "This idea could change everything for us." "You young people always in such a hurry," Mrs. Rodriguez sighed, but her eyes held admiration as she watched Gabriella work. 3 weeks later, Aiden took his first steps, toddling unsteadily across their small living room while Gabriella recorded the moment on her phone, tears welling in her eyes. There was no partner to share this milestone, no grandparents cooing in delight, just Gabriella, overwhelmed with pride and a bittersweet awareness of all Mason was missing. "Look at you, big boy!" she cheered as Aiden collapsed into her arms, his face alight with achievement. Later, she watched the video again after the triplets were asleep, wondering if she should send it to Mason before deciding against it. He had made his choice. The following weekend, the university's business school hosted a small networking event for MBA students and local investors. Gabriella had almost skipped it. Finding childcare for evening events was nearly impossible, until Mrs. Rodriguez unexpectedly offered to stay late. "Go, show them how brilliant you are," the older woman insisted. "The babies will be fine." Gabriella arrived at the event feeling like an imposter. Her one professional outfit, a navy blazer from a thrift store and her least worn pair of slacks, paled in comparison to the tailored suits around her. Most attendees were already engaged in animated conversations, cocktails in hand, connections being forged over shared backgrounds at prestigious undergraduate schools or summer homes in the Hamptons. For 45 minutes, Gabriella circulated awkwardly, collecting business cards and trying to inject herself into conversations that inevitably shifted away from her. The familiar sensation of being an outsider, the same feeling she'd experienced at Mason's corporate events, threatened to overwhelm her confidence. She was contemplating an early exit when a silver-haired man in a worn blazer approached her. "You look about as comfortable as I feel at these things," he said with a kind smile. Harold Henderson, retired solar energy engineer. Gabriella Johnson, MBA student and mother of triplets, she replied, shaking his hand. Triplets? Now that's impressive, he chuckled. What brings you to business school? Something about his unpretentious manner loosened the knot in Gabriella's chest. Before she knew it, she was explaining her energy storage concept, her words flowing with the passion she'd been containing for weeks. She pulled out her tablet, showing him sketches and calculations as they found a quiet corner. Most people focus on improving the panels, she explained. But the real bottleneck is storage efficiency. My design addresses that by using a composite polymer membrane instead of traditional separators, Henderson finished, eyes widening. That's actually quite brilliant. For the next hour they huddled together, Henderson poking holes in her theory and Gabriella defending or adapting her ideas in real time. By the end, the retired engineer was shaking his head in amazement. Why hasn't anyone else thought of this approach? He wondered aloud. Perhaps they have, Gabriella replied, but they lacked the desperation to make it work. 2 days later, Henderson called with an unexpected proposition. I've been thinking about your concept, Ms. Johnson. I'd like to offer some seed funding, $50,000 for a proper patent application and initial prototype development. Gabriella nearly dropped the phone. Mr. Henderson, that's a calculated risk, he interrupted. Something tells me you're going to prove everyone wrong. I want a front-row seat when you do. The following week, Gabriella signed patent paperwork in a small legal office, the triplets playing on the floor while a pro bono attorney explained the process. This initial filing protects your concept while you develop it further, he explained. If it's as revolutionary as Mr. Henderson believes, it could be quite valuable. With the seed funding secured, Gabriella rented a small workspace in a rundown industrial building in Brooklyn. The space was bare bones, concrete floors, exposed pipes, a collection of second-hand equipment, but it was hers. She set up a makeshift play area in one corner for the time she needed to bring the triplets along. The first prototype was crude, assembled from modified components and custom-ordered materials. When it successfully stored and discharged energy for 10 seconds, Gabriella danced alone in the empty workspace, her jubilation echoing off the concrete walls. That night, scrolling through social media before bed, a habit she couldn't seem to break despite the pain it often caused, Gabriella stumbled across photos from the Reynolds estate. Mason and Stephanie's mansion was decorated elaborately for the arrival of their newborn son, with professional photographers capturing every detail of the nursery that probably cost more than Gabriella's entire apartment building. The contrast was stark. Their baby welcomed with a professionally catered celebration while she had struggled to afford a single small cake for the triplets' first birthday 3 months earlier. The photos showed Mason cradling his new son, his expression proud and protective, the devoted father he had refused to be for Aiden, Sophia, and Olivia. Stephanie stood beside him in designer maternity wear, not a hair out of place despite supposedly having given birth weeks earlier. Gabriella closed the app, a familiar ache in her chest. The next day she bought a small chocolate cake from the corner bakery and placed a single candle in the center. The triplets watched with wide eyes as she lit it. "Happy birthday to us," she said softly, helping them blow out the flame. "To our new beginning." As they smeared chocolate across their faces, Gabriella made a silent promise. "One day, you'll have everything you deserve, and he'll know exactly what he lost." Watching her children's smiling faces around the homemade birthday cake, Gabriella couldn't possibly imagine that in just 4 years, her name would grace the cover of Fast Company as the founder of the decade's most promising energy startup, while Mason would be struggling to maintain relevance in the market she was about to revolutionize. 2 years had passed since Gabriella had first sketched her revolutionary battery design. The triplets were now 3 years old, their personalities blossoming distinctly despite their identical schedule of public daycare drop-offs and pickups. Aiden had developed a fascination with numbers, often counting objects obsessively. Sophia turned everything into an art canvas, including occasionally the walls. Olivia, The quiet observer absorbed everything with analytical precision beyond her years. Gabriella's MBA was complete, hanging framed above her desk, a symbol of late nights and sacrifices. The certificate looked oddly out of place in their modest apartment, where toys spilled from plastic bins and laundry dried on racks in the kitchen. Today marked her 27th rejection from potential investors. The email glowed mockingly on her phone screen as she hurried to collect the triplets from daycare before closing time. While your energy storage concept shows promise, we find the risk profile incompatible with our current investment strategy. The same polite dismissal, nearly word for word, that she'd received 26 times before. Different firms, identical responses. Her idea was interesting but speculative. Her experience impressive but limited. "Mommy!" 3 voices greeted her simultaneously as she entered the daycare, momentarily washing away the disappointment. Small bodies collided with her legs, artwork was thrust into her hands, and the daily chaos of parenting triplets resumed. "Did you make good batteries today?" Aiden asked earnestly, having absorbed that Mommy's work involved something called batteries. "Not today, buddy," Gabriella answered, helping them into coats. "But tomorrow might be the day." Back at the apartment, Gabriella spread her prototype sketches and rejection notes across the kitchen table while the triplets ate dinner. Pasta again, affordable, filling, and generally accepted by 3 particular palates. Every few minutes, she wiped sauce from a face or refilled a sippy cup, her attention divided but never fully detached from either responsibility. That night, after tucking 3 squirming bodies into their beds, Gabriella returned to the kitchen table where components and circuit boards lay scattered among children's drawings. The prototype in her Brooklyn workspace was promising but limited by substandard materials. Without significant investment, she couldn't progress to commercial viability. Her phone buzzed, an email from Professor Chen, her former Advanced Energy Systems instructor. "Gabriella, an interesting opportunity has come up. Victor Blackwood is looking for innovative energy storage solutions and asked if I knew any promising researchers. I mentioned your work. He'd like to meet. Call me." Gabriella's heart raced as she immediately searched Victor Blackwood online. The results made her breath catch. Founder and CEO of Blackwood Industries, a global leader in renewable technologies, and, most significantly, Mason Reynolds's longtime business rival. Photos showed a formidable man in his early 60s with silver hair and piercing eyes. Articles detailed the legendary competition between Blackwood and Reynolds Enterprises, dating back decades. Where Reynolds focused on traditional energy with gradual green initiatives, Blackwood had aggressively pursued renewable technologies. Gabriella called Professor Chen immediately, despite the late hour. "This is a remarkable opportunity," he confirmed after answering. "Blackwood rarely meets with unproven inventors. Your concept must have genuinely intrigued him." "When would this meeting be?" Gabriella asked, already calculating childcare logistics. "That's the thing. Tomorrow at 10. His schedule opened unexpectedly. Can you make it?" "I'll be there," she promised, mind racing through contingencies. The next morning became a masterclass in chaos management. The babysitter Gabriella had arranged called at 7 to cancel, her child running a fever. Mrs. Rodriguez was visiting family in Florida. The daycare wouldn't open until 8:30, cutting it impossibly close for the meeting downtown. "Change of plans, team," Gabriella announced to the triplets as she helped them into their clothes. "You're coming to a very important meeting with Mommy." She dressed them in their cleanest outfits, packed a bag with snacks, quiet toys, and emergency supplies, and rehearsed her presentation while securing 3 squirming children into their car seats in the rideshare. The imposing Blackwood Industries headquarters gleamed in the morning sun, all steel and glass rising 70 stories above Manhattan. Gabriella approached the reception desk, one hand clutching her presentation materials, the other firmly holding Olivia's hand while Aiden and Sophia clung to her coat. The receptionist's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. "Ms. Johnson?" Mr. Blackwood is expecting you. Her gaze dropped to the three children. He didn't mention there would be additional attendees. Family emergency, Gabriella explained smoothly. They'll be very well behaved. The elevator ride to the 68th floor gave Gabriella precious moments to center herself and brief the triplets. This is Mommy's important work meeting. Remember our quiet game? Whoever stays quietest gets extra story time tonight. The conference room was minimalist and intimidating. A massive table of polished dark wood surrounded by leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows offering vertigo-inducing views of the city. Gabriella quickly established the triplets in a corner with coloring books and their favorite stuffed animals. Victor Blackwood entered precisely at 10, his presence immediately commanding the room. He was taller than Gabriella expected, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that conveyed power without ostentation. His eyes, shrewd and evaluating, moved from Gabriella to the children and back. "Ms. Johnson," he said, voice deep and measured, "I see you've brought your quality control team." For a horrifying moment, Gabriella thought she'd made a catastrophic mistake. Then she noticed the slight curve at the corner of his mouth. "Mr. Blackwood," she replied, extending her hand. "Thank you for accommodating us. My childcare arrangements fell through this morning." "Adaptability is an underrated business skill," he remarked, shaking her hand firmly. "Shall we proceed?" For the next hour, Gabriella presented her energy storage concept, explaining the innovative polymer membrane that allowed for greater efficiency and longevity while using more sustainable materials. She moved seamlessly between detailed technical explanations and broader market applications, occasionally glancing to ensure the triplets remained occupied. Blackwood interrupted with incisive questions that revealed his comprehensive understanding of the technology. Each query probed potential weaknesses, forcing Gabriella to defend or reconsider aspects of her design in real time. Remarkably, the triplets maintained unusual good behavior, coloring quietly in the corner, occasionally whispering to each other but never disrupting the flow of conversation. Blackwood glanced their way periodically, his expression unreadable. "Your theoretical metrics are impressive," he finally said, "but theory and practice often diverge significantly." "That's why I've built this," Gabriella replied, opening her bag to reveal a small working prototype. "It's crude, limited by budget constraints, but it demonstrates the core principle." Blackwood's eyebrows rose slightly as she activated the device, displaying its charging and output capabilities on her tablet. For several minutes he examined the prototype, asking detailed questions about materials and construction. Then, unexpectedly, he turned his attention to the triplets. "How old are they?" "3," Gabriella answered, surprised by the shift. "And you've developed this technology while raising them alone?" There was no judgment in his tone, merely assessment. "Yes, we're a package deal," she replied simply. Blackwood nodded, as if confirming something to himself. He returned to the conference table, studying her market projections once more. "Ms. Johnson, your technology for energy storage is exactly what I've been looking for," he said finally. "The Reynolds Enterprises is stagnated in outdated solutions. You have the innovation that could change the game." Gabriella's heart skipped at the mention of Mason's company. "I'm prepared to offer $2 million in development funding," Blackwood continued, "with one condition: complete secrecy until we're ready for full patent protection and market launch." The figure momentarily stole Gabriella's ability to speak. $2 million was exponentially beyond her most optimistic expectations. "Why the secrecy?" she managed to ask. Blackwood's expression hardened slightly. "The renewable energy sector is competitive. Reynolds in particular has a history of acquiring promising technologies before they reach market. A diplomatic way of saying Mason bought and buried innovations that threatened his existing product lines." "I need your answer today," Blackwood added. "This opportunity won't remain open." Gabriella glanced at her children, still quietly coloring, unaware that their futures hung in the balance of this conversation. $2 million meant proper development resources, patent protection, and financial security for her family. "I accept," she said firmly. "With one condition of my own. I maintain controlling interest in the technology and any resulting company." Blackwood studied her for a long moment, then smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his stern features. "You drive a hard bargain, Ms. Johnson. I agree to your terms." 2 days later, Gabriella signed contracts in Blackwood's office, her hands trembling slightly but her signature firm and decisive. The funding would be released in stages, with benchmarks for continued development. "Have you thought about a company name?" Blackwood asked as they concluded the paperwork. "Genesis Innovation," Gabriella replied without hesitation, "because this is just the beginning." The following week, she hired her first employee, Elena Martinez, a brilliant engineer who had been repeatedly passed over for promotion at her previous firm, and who, like Gabriella, was raising a child alone. "Why me?" Elena had asked during their interview in the small Brooklyn workspace. "My resume isn't as impressive as other candidates." "Because you've had to be twice as good to get half as far," Gabriella answered. "And because you understand what we're building isn't just technology, it's a future for our children." On a crisp autumn morning, Gabriella hung a modest sign on the door of their newly leased office space, Genesis Innovation. Standing beneath it, keys in hand, she felt a surge of pride unlike anything she'd experienced since the triplets' birth. As she hung the modest plaque on the door of her first real office, Gabriella didn't imagine that in 3 years she would be buying subsidiaries of Reynolds Enterprises using the same capital that Mason always believed she would never have access to. The modest sign reading Genesis Innovation marked just the beginning. With Victor Blackwood's investment, what had once been a desperate dream sketched at a kitchen table was transforming into reality at breathtaking speed. 1 year later, the Genesis offices had expanded from that initial Brooklyn workspace to occupy an entire floor in a converted warehouse, its industrial bones reimagined with modern glass partitions, collaborative workspaces, and most distinctively, a colorful room with 3 small desks where the triplets spent afternoons after preschool. The company culture reflected its founders' priorities. Unlike the sterile, intimidating environments Gabriella had encountered at Reynolds Enterprises events, Genesis buzzed with diverse voices and backgrounds. Her hiring philosophy was simple: find brilliant people who had been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed by traditional corporate structures. "The polymer stability tests exceed expectations," Dr. Helena Cho announced, entering Gabriella's office with a tablet displaying promising graphs. "We're getting 92% efficiency after 500 cycles." "That's excellent," Gabriella replied, looking up from where she sat cross-legged on the floor beside Sophia, who was intently drawing what appeared to be a rainbow-colored battery. "What about the heat dispersion issue?" Dr. Cho smiled at Sophia's artwork before answering. "The new composite shell resolved most concerns. We'll have complete data by tomorrow morning." Their conversation was interrupted by the distinct sound of small sneakers running down the hallway. Aiden burst into the office, clutching a sheet of paper with numbers scrawled in crayon. "Mommy, I counted all the chairs in the whole office and there are 47. Then I counted all the computers and there are 39. That means 8 people don't have computers," he announced, his mathematical discovery delivered with the gravity of a scientific breakthrough. "That's because some people share workstations, and others, like Mr. Rivera, work mostly in the lab," Gabriella explained, accepting his paper with appropriate seriousness. "This is excellent counting, Aiden." Dr. Cho watched this exchange with amusement. "I should get back to the lab. The investors are arriving at 3, correct?" "Yes, and I'll need the latest stability reports," Gabriella confirmed, transitioning seamlessly between CEO and mother roles. At 4 years old, the triplets had become fixtures at Genesis, where employees had grown accustomed to their presence. Olivia often sat quietly observing team meetings, absorbing complex concepts with unnerving focus. Sophia's artwork decorated conference room walls alongside patent drawings. Aiden had appointed himself unofficial office counter, keeping inventory of everything from paper clips to ceiling tiles. When the Japanese investment team arrived that afternoon, they found Gabriella in the conference room reviewing projections while absent-mindedly helping Sophia with a drawing. "Ms. Johnson," the lead investor began, slightly nonplussed by the child's presence, "perhaps we should reschedule for a time more convenient?" "This is actually quite convenient," Gabriella replied smoothly. "My children are an integral part of Genesis. They remind us daily why sustainable energy matters. It's their future we're building." The meeting proceeded, with Gabriella articulating complex technical concepts while occasionally sliding a new crayon towards Sophia. By the time she concluded her presentation, the investor's initial discomfort had transformed into admiration for her multitasking capabilities. "Your commitment to both innovation and family is most impressive," the lead investor commented as they prepared to leave. "In Japan, we believe the strongest businesses are those that honor their foundations." 3 weeks later, their funding was secured, adding another $12 million to Genesis' rapidly growing valuation. The breakthrough came 6 months later. After countless iterations, the Genesis team successfully developed a battery prototype that demonstrated unprecedented efficiency using sustainable components. The patent approval arrived on a Wednesday morning, prompting an impromptu celebration throughout the office: champagne for adults, sparkling apple juice in plastic champagne flutes for the triplets. "To Genesis Innovation," Victor Blackwood toasted, having flown in specifically for the occasion, "and to its remarkable founder who saw possibilities where others saw only obstacles." As the team celebrated, Gabriella felt a tug on her sleeve. Aiden looked up at her with Mason's blue eyes, his expression uncommonly serious for a 4-year-old. "Mommy, why do Kai and Emma at school have a daddy but we don't?" The question silenced the immediate vicinity. Gabriella knelt to meet his gaze, aware of watchful eyes but focused entirely on her son's innocent inquiry. "Some families have a daddy, others don't," she explained gently. "Our family is perfect just as it is: you, me, Sophia, and Olivia. But who reads the daddy parts in bedtime stories?" he persisted. "I read all the parts," Gabriella smiled, tapping his nose lightly. "And I do all the voices, don't I?" Aiden considered this, then nodded solemnly. "You do a really good dragon voice." The moment passed, but later that night, after tucking 3 exhausted children into bed, Gabriella allowed herself a rare moment of reflection on what Mason had sacrificed. Not just the chance to hear Aiden's brilliant observations or witness Sophia's artistic talent emerging, but the 1,000 small moments that constituted these extraordinary lives. The patent approval catapulted Genesis into a new realm of visibility. Industry publications began requesting interviews, and venture capitalists who had previously rejected Gabriella's proposals now called daily. When Bloomberg requested a profile on the renewable energy sector's rising star, Gabriella hesitated only briefly before agreeing. The interview took place in the Genesis offices, with photographer Annie Kim capturing candid images of Gabriella in her element, reviewing designs with engineers, conferring with the financial team, and most distinctively, helping Olivia with a puzzle during a brief break. "How do you balance it all?" the reporter, Diane Way, asked, watching this seamless transition between CEO and mother. Gabriella considered the question thoughtfully. "I don't balance," she finally answered with unexpected honesty. "I prioritize, and my children always come first." "Many executives would hesitate to admit that," Way commented, noting Gabriella's lack of the typical corporate defensiveness. "Many executives are still pretending work and life exist in separate compartments," Gabriella replied. "I rejected that fiction the moment I was left pregnant and alone. Integration isn't just necessary, it's powerful." The article, published 3 weeks later, went viral. "The Integration Revolution: How Gabriella Johnson Redefined Success," presented a new paradigm of leadership one that embraced humanity rather than suppressing it. The accompanying photos showed a confident woman in a world of her creation, neither apologizing for her priorities nor compromising on excellence. The wall of Gabriella's office told the story of this journey, photos of milestones arranged chronologically. The triplets' first birthday, celebrated with a homemade cake in their tiny Queens apartment. Olivia's first steps, taken in the original Brooklyn workspace. Gabriella receiving her MBA, 3 toddlers balanced precariously on her lap during the ceremony. The ribbon cutting at Genesis headquarters, tiny hands helping to hold the oversized scissors. Conspicuously absent was any reference to Mason. For the triplets, family was mommy and the 3 of them. They had never seen a photograph of their biological father, though Gabriella knew the day would come when more detailed explanations would be necessary. Meanwhile, she discreetly monitored Mason's trajectory through industry news. Reynolds Enterprises had expanded its market share, though less impressively than analysts had predicted. Photos from charity galas showed Mason and Stephanie projecting perfect partnership, their marriage apparently thriving where Gabriella's had collapsed. Occasionally, she wondered if Mason knew about the triplets. Her attorney had sent legal notification after their birth, fulfilling her obligation to inform the biological father. The response had been a substantial check and a confidentiality agreement, which she had returned, unsigned, with a simple note: their existence is not for sale. As Genesis Innovation reached its 3rd year, the company achieved something extraordinary, a market valuation of $1.2 billion, catapulting Gabriella into the rarefied air of tech unicorn founders. The achievement coincided with the triplets' 5th birthday, celebrated with a modest party at their neighborhood park, worlds away from the corporate milestones being lauded in the financial press. That evening, as she helped 3 excited children prepare for bed, Gabriella's phone chimed with a notification. Opening it, she found an invitation that made her breath catch. The prestigious Tech Summit wanted her as a featured speaker for their upcoming conference. The location: Chicago. The date: exactly 5 years and 2 months after the night Mason had thrown her out into the rain. Gabriella stared at the invitation, conflicting emotions washing over her. She had avoided Chicago deliberately, building her new life in New York, where Mason's shadow couldn't reach. Now, the industry's most significant platform was offering her its spotlight in the very city where she had once been deemed insufficient. While celebrating the billion-dollar valuation of her company with a simple home-cooked dinner with her children, Gabriella didn't know that the invitation to speak at the next Tech Summit would bring her face-to-face with Mason for the first time in 5 years, in a public confrontation that would forever change the balance of power between them. The Chicago skyline appeared on Gabriella's tablet screen as she reviewed the Tech Summit invitation once more. 5 years ago, those same buildings had witnessed her darkest moments. Now they would host her greatest triumph. The timing seemed almost orchestrated by fate itself. "Ms. Johnson?" Her assistant, Layla, appeared at the office door. "Mr. Blackwood is on line 1. He says it's urgent." Gabriella nodded, switching her tablet to the confidential folder labeled Project Phoenix before answering. "Victor, good morning." "Gabriella." Victor Blackwood's deep voice filled her office. "Our legal team has finalized the merger documentation, $4.3 billion, with all contingencies addressed." She released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "And the Reynolds subsidiaries?" "All 3 acquisitions have been structured exactly as discussed. Reynolds Green Tech, Reynolds Battery Solutions, and Reynolds Solar Systems will transition to Genesis Blackwood ownership immediately following our announcement." Gabriella glanced at the framed photo of the triplets on her desk, last year's holiday portrait, all 3 beaming in coordinating outfits. In the 5 years since their birth, every decision she'd made had been for them. This merger was no different, though she couldn't deny the satisfaction of the target. "These acquisitions will significantly weaken Reynolds Enterprises," Victor observed, his tone measured. "Any problem with that?" Gabriella traced her finger over the Genesis Innovation logo embossed on her leather portfolio. "Business is business," she replied, reaching for the Mont Blanc pen she'd purchased to commemorate her company's first million in profits. "I'll sign the documents this afternoon." After ending the call, Gabriella opened her calendar to review the Tech Summit schedule. Her keynote address was positioned prominently on the opening day, a recognition of Genesis Innovation's rising status in the tech world. The Triplets' travel arrangements were already confirmed. She never attended overnight events without them. That evening, Gabriella helped the children pack for their Chicago trip, answering their excited questions about the airplane and hotel. Their small suitcases lay open on their beds, carefully selected outfits folded beside favorite stuffed animals and books. "Is Chicago a cool city, Mommy?" Aiden asked, meticulously counting pairs of socks before placing them in his dinosaur-patterned suitcase. "Have you been there before?" Gabriella's hands stilled momentarily as she folded Sophia's favorite dress. The question, so innocent, pierced through layers of carefully constructed compartmentalization. "Yes," she answered carefully. "I lived there once, a long time ago." "Did you like it?" Olivia inquired, her perceptive eyes studying her mother's expression. "Parts of it," Gabriella said, forcing lightness into her tone. "The museums are amazing. Maybe we'll have time to visit one." The children accepted this, their attention quickly diverted to debating which books to bring. Gabriella watched them, marveling at how completely they had been sheltered from the ugliness of their beginnings. To them, their family arrangement was simply normal. Mommy and the three of them against the world, a complete unit requiring no additions. The next afternoon, their flight from LaGuardia to O'Hare provided Gabriella with a rare moment of stillness. With Aiden and Sophia absorbed in their tablets and Olivia napping against her shoulder, she gazed out the window as New York receded below. Chicago represented her past, but she was returning not as the discarded wife, not as the desperate single mother, but as Gabriella Johnson, founder and CEO of Genesis Innovation, orchestrator of a multi-billion-dollar merger. The Four Seasons Chicago welcomed them with the deferential efficiency reserved for valued guests. Their suite, spacious and elegantly appointed with panoramic lake views, earned gasps of delight from the children, who immediately began exploring every corner. "Look, Mommy! The bathtub has jets!" Sophia called from the marble bathroom. "Can we order room service?" Aiden asked, already examining the menu with serious concentration. Gabriella smiled, unpacking their formal clothes for tomorrow's event. The children rarely witnessed the corporate side of her life, but the Tech Summit announcement required their presence, a symbolic statement of the family-centric values that differentiated Genesis from competitors like Reynolds Enterprises. Later that evening, with room service dinner consumed and the children bathed, Gabriella carefully prepared their outfits for the following day. Aiden squirmed as she adjusted the small bow tie against his collar. "Why do we have to wear fancy clothes?" Sophia complained, eyeing her navy dress with suspicion. "They're itchy." "Because tomorrow is very important," Gabriella explained, smoothing Sophia's braids. "Mommy's company is announcing something big." She didn't mention that after months of secret negotiations with Victor Blackwood, Genesis Innovation and Blackwood Industries would announce a historic fusion that would reshape the renewable energy landscape. Nor did she explain that this fusion included the strategic acquisition of 3 Reynolds Enterprises subsidiaries, critically weakening Mason's core business. Most importantly, she had no idea that Mason Reynolds would be sitting in the front row during her announcement. After tucking the children into bed, Gabriella stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere out there was the Lakeview building where Mason had once told her she would never belong in his world. The memory no longer stung as it once had. The wound had scarred over, leaving only a reminder of her journey. Her phone chimed with a message from the Tech Summit coordinator. "Schedule update. You'll be speaking immediately before Mason Reynolds on opening day." Gabriella's pulse quickened. She had known Mason was attending. It would have been impossible for the CEO of Reynolds Enterprises to miss the industry's premier event, but she hadn't expected such direct sequential positioning. Another message followed quickly. Mr. Blackwood requested this arrangement. Hope that's acceptable." A small smile curved her lips as she replied affirmatively. Victor's strategic mind never ceased to impress her. This positioning would ensure Mason witnessed firsthand the announcement that would undermine his company's position. Meanwhile, across the city in the Reynolds Enterprises headquarters, Mason Reynolds reviewed his presentation notes while Stephanie paced the office, phone pressed to her ear. "The Q2 numbers need to show improvement," she insisted, her voice carrying the sharp edge of stress. "The board meeting next week will be brutal if we don't have positive projections to present." Mason loosened his tie, fatigue evident in the lines around his eyes. At 39, he retained the handsome features that had once graced magazine covers, though recent years had added silver at his temples and a permanent furrow between his brows. "We need to impress the investors, Mason," Stephanie continued, ending her call. "The stock has dropped 15% this quarter. The tech summit is our opportunity to control the narrative." Mason nodded, scanning the updated event schedule that had arrived minutes earlier. His keynote had been moved later, preceded by someone named Gabriella Johnson from Genesis Innovation. The name registered no recognition, merely another startup founder he would politely applaud before taking the stage himself. "Who is this Johnson woman?" Stephanie asked, reading over his shoulder. "And why is she speaking before you?" "Blackwood's latest protege, apparently," Mason replied dismissively. "Some battery technology, nothing that concerns us directly." How monumentally incorrect that assessment would prove to be. The next morning, Gabriella dressed carefully in her hotel suite, selecting a tailored black Armani suit that projected confidence without ostentation. As she applied her makeup, the reflection that gazed back bore little resemblance to the devastated young woman who had once stood rain-soaked on a Chicago sidewalk with nowhere to go. Through the bathroom door, she could hear the triplets chattering excitedly as Layla helped them dress in their coordinating outfits. Today they would witness their mother in her professional element, a side of her they rarely saw in such a formal setting. From the hotel window, Gabriella could see the Lakeview building in the distance, its glass exterior reflecting the morning sunlight. 5 years ago, Mason had declared her unworthy of his world. Today, she would redefine that world according to her own terms. Her phone buzzed with a text from Victor. "Everything is ready. Tomorrow, Reynolds Enterprises will never be the same." Observing Chicago illuminated through the window of her suite, Gabriella caressed the small head of sleeping Aiden, his face so similar to Mason's, unaware that in less than 24 hours, the man who had discarded her as insufficient would see for the first time the children he had never known and the empire he had inadvertently inspired. The McCormick Place Convention Center buzzed with anticipation as technology's elite gathered for the opening day of Tech Summit. Executive assistants scurried between meeting points, journalists huddled in corners exchanging predictions, and industry titans exchanged calculated pleasantries while assessing competitors. The massive exhibition hall had been transformed into a showcase of innovation, with the main stage dominating the center, a gleaming platform where fortunes would be made or broken in the next 24 hours. Behind the stage, Gabriella adjusted her Armani suit in a full-length mirror, its sleek lines projecting the confidence she had earned through years of relentless work. She checked her presentation one final time on her tablet, confirming the animations and transition points were flawless. Nearby, Aiden, Sophia, and Olivia sat in a small cordoned-off area, dressed in their coordinating navy blue outfits, engrossed in educational games on their tablets under the watchful eye of Layla. 5 minutes, Ms. Johnson, a coordinator with a headset announced, clipboard in hand. Gabriella nodded, taking a deep breath to center herself. This moment represented the culmination of 5 years of struggle, determination, and strategic vision. The merger announcement would catapult Genesis Innovation from promising unicorn to industry powerhouse. On the opposite side of the backstage area, Mason Reynolds reviewed his notes with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to commanding attention. His custom Tom Ford suit and meticulously styled hair projected the image he had cultivated for years. Success personified. Yet the slight tremor in his hands and the deepening lines around his eyes betrayed mounting pressure. Reynolds Enterprises' stock had declined 3 quarters in a row, and whispers of board dissatisfaction grew louder each month. "The schedule change is disrespectful," Stephanie whispered harshly, scrolling through her phone. "You're Mason Reynolds. You should be opening the conference, not following some upstart Blackwood protege." Mason's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "It's a minor inconvenience. We'll address it with the organizers next year." Neither noticed Gabriella across the room, nor the 3 children who shared Mason's distinctive blue eyes. Out on stage, the event presenter adjusted his microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have an exciting change to our program. To kick off our event with the announcement of a revolutionary partnership, please welcome Victor Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Industries." In the front row, Mason frowned. Last-minute changes weren't his forte, especially when they diminished his moment in the spotlight. Beside him, Stephanie straightened, her expression sharpening as she assessed this unexpected development. Victor Blackwood strode onto the stage with the confident gait of a man comfortable wielding power. At 60, his imposing silver-haired presence commanded immediate respect. "4 years ago," he began, his deep voice resonating through the hall, "a young entrepreneur presented me with an idea many called impossible. Today, that idea is worth billions." His eyes swept the audience, momentarily lingering on Mason. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present Gabriella Johnson, founder of Genesis Innovation and the mind behind the sustainable energy revolution that has outperformed all Wall Street expectations this year." When Gabriella ascended the steps to the stage, followed by 3 5-year-old children, time seemed to freeze. Her transformation was complete. Not just the designer clothing or elegantly styled hair, but the unshakable confidence of someone who had earned her place in the world through sheer force of will. In the front row, Mason felt the blood drain from his face. The woman he had discarded as irrelevant now commanded the industry's most prestigious platform. And those children, the resemblance was undeniable. The same facial structure, the same determined chin, and most strikingly, the same penetrating blue eyes he saw in the mirror every morning. "Thank you, Victor," Gabriella smiled, her composed voice amplified throughout the hall. "For those who don't know me, I'm Gabriella Johnson, CEO of Genesis Innovation." Mason knocked over his water bottle, liquid spreading across his lap while cameras captured the moment. Stephanie shot him an irritated glance, dabbing at his suit with a napkin. "Today I'm pleased to announce that Genesis Innovation and Blackwood Industries are forming the largest sustainable energy alliance in recent history," Gabriella continued, as impressive graphics appeared on the massive screens behind her. "Our proprietary storage technology increases efficiency by 78% compared to current solutions, including those from Reynolds Enterprises." The company name was pronounced without special emphasis, but Mason felt it like a physical blow. Journalists in the audience began typing furiously, sensing a story beyond the business announcement. As part of this historic $4.3 billion merger, we will acquire 3 strategic subsidiaries, including Reynolds Green Tech, Reynolds Battery Solutions, and Reynolds Solar Systems. A murmur rippled through the audience. Mason paled further, while Stephanie whispered something urgent in his ear. Those subsidiaries represented 40% of Reynolds Enterprises' market value and most of their green energy portfolio, the very division Mason had been preparing to highlight in his own presentation. Throughout her 45-minute presentation, Gabriella never directly looked at Mason, but every word seemed calibrated to dismantle his certainties. Her delivery was flawless, authoritative without arrogance, technical without losing accessibility. When she mentioned our family approach to business and called the Triplets forward for a brief appearance, the entire room connected the dots simultaneously. Mason sat motionless, processing not just the professional devastation of losing key subsidiaries, but the personal revelation that he was apparently the father of 3 children he had never acknowledged. Stephanie's expression had transformed from irritation to calculated damage control, her fingers flying across her phone, undoubtedly contacting crisis management. By the time Gabriella concluded, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Industry executives rushed forward, eager to establish connections with the news sector powerhouse. Mason remained frozen in his seat, watching three children who clearly carried his DNA being guided backstage by an assistant. During the question period, a Wall Street Journal reporter approached the microphone. "Ms. Johnson, your company has just acquired subsidiaries from a competitor who, rumors suggest, has a personal connection to your story. Would you care to comment?" The silence in the hall became palpable. Cameras swiveled to capture Mason's reaction. "Business is rarely just business, is it?" Gabriella responded with a calm smile. "Many of you don't know this, but I began this journey as a single mother of triplets in a tiny Queens apartment after my ex-husband decided we weren't worthy of his surname or presence." Flashes erupted as all eyes shuttled between Gabriella on stage and Mason in the audience. "The acquisition of these companies isn't personal, it's purely strategic," she continued smoothly. "But I admit there's a certain poetic symmetry in how the universe works. After all, who could have predicted that the girl from the Bronx trying to pass as someone important would be standing here today? Isn't that right, Mr. Reynolds?" The direct quote of his own cruel words made Mason visibly choke. Stephanie, recognizing the public relations disaster unfolding, was already typing frantically on her phone, likely contacting crisis managers. After the presentation, the convention center became a social minefield. Mason desperately tried to reach Gabriella, who remained constantly surrounded by admirers and potential business partners. The triplets, polite but reserved, stayed close to their mother, unaware of the drama unfolding around them. At the post-presentation reception, Mason found himself increasingly isolated as word spread. Stephanie had disappeared, claiming she needed to manage the damage. Industry colleagues who had been effusive earlier now found reasons to be elsewhere. Finally, in a momentary clearing of the crowd, Mason approached Gabriella as she accepted a glass of champagne from a waiter. "We need to talk," he said, his usually commanding voice trembling and unrecognizable to those who knew the imposing CEO. Gabriella assessed him as if he were a stranger. "Mason, what a surprise to see you here. Are they—" He hesitated, voice nearly pleading. "Are they my children?" "Biologically speaking, yes," she replied coolly. "Legally and in every other aspect that matters, they're solely mine." "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he demanded, desperation edging into his tone. Her gaze turned glacial. "My attorney formally notified you after their birth. Your response was a check and a confidentiality agreement, remember? A check I returned, by the way." Mason staggered as if physically struck. My attorney never—" "Fascinating how responsibility always eludes you," Gabriella observed, taking a sip of champagne. "Regardless, it's all documented. Fortunately, I discovered we didn't need your money. Or you." While the audience applauded her revolutionary presentation, Gabriella knew the real storm was yet to come, because in the question session that would follow, the Wall Street Journal journalist was about to ask the question that would transform a commercial coup into a personal scandal that would shake the entire American corporate world. "Fascinating how responsibility always eludes you," Gabriella observed, taking a sip of champagne. "Regardless, it's all documented. Fortunately, I discovered we didn't need your money. Or you." The expression that crossed Mason's face was one Gabriella had never seen during their marriage. Raw devastation stripped of all pretense. For a moment, he looked genuinely shattered. The carefully constructed facade of Mason Reynolds, business titan, crumbling before her eyes. "They're beautiful," he whispered, glancing across the room where the triplets were examining a holographic display with Layla. "They look like you?" Gabriella finished. "Yes, especially Aiden. The eyes, particularly." Mason took a half step toward them. But Gabriella's hand on his arm stopped him with surprising firmness. "Don't," she warned. "They don't know who you are, and this isn't the place for introductions." "But I'm their father," he protested, desperation edging into his voice. "Biologically," she corrected coldly, "fatherhood is earned through presence, not genetics." A photographer approached, camera raised. "Ms. Johnson, could we get a photo with Mr. Reynolds? The industry's competing visionaries together would make an excellent story." "I'm afraid I need to check on my children," Gabriella replied smoothly. "Perhaps another time." As she walked away, Mason called after her. "This isn't over, Gabriella. We need to talk about this properly." She turned back briefly. "There's nothing to discuss. The acquisition will proceed as announced. As for personal matters, those were settled 5 years ago on a rainy night when you made your priorities abundantly clear." The reception continued around them, investors and executives circling Gabriella like satellites drawn to a new center of gravity. Meanwhile, Mason stood increasingly isolated, his phone buzzing incessantly with board members demanding explanations for both the business ambush and the personal revelations that were already racing through social media. The morning after the tech summit bombshell, Gabriella awoke in her hotel suite to the sound of her phone continuously chiming with notifications. She silenced it without looking, focusing instead on the 3 sleeping children sprawled across the king-sized bed. They had crawled in with her sometime during the night, a familiar comfort routine whenever they stayed in unfamiliar places. "Good morning, superstars," she whispered, planting gentle kisses on 3 foreheads as they stirred. "Ready for pancakes before we head home?" While the triplets enthusiastically discussed pancake toppings, Gabriella finally checked her phone. The notifications were overwhelming, hundreds of press inquiries, messages from industry contacts, and alerts from her PR team about trending topics. The story had exploded exactly as Victor had predicted. Headlines screamed across digital platforms: "CEO of Reynolds abandoned ex-wife pregnant with triplets." "The Revenge Empire, how Gabriella Johnson outmaneuvered her ex-husband," and "From Abandonment to Billions, the Extraordinary Journey of a Single Mother." CNBC was running a special segment titled Power Shift: The Genesis Blackwood Merger and the Reynolds Family Drama. Bloomberg had already updated their company valuation models, showing Reynolds Enterprises stock in free fall, down 22% in pre-market trading. A text from Victor was characteristically concise. "Excellent execution. Board meeting at 10 tomorrow in New York to finalize acquisitions." Room service arrived with pancakes, temporarily diverting the children's attention. As they ate, Gabriella scrolled through the media storm, carefully keeping the screen angled away from curious eyes. A statement from Stephanie Parker Reynolds had already been released. "I was unaware of the details of Mason's previous divorce or the existence of these children. This is as shocking to me as it is to the public. I am taking time to process this information and request privacy during this difficult period." Gabriella almost laughed at the calculated distance Stephanie was already creating between herself and Mason. Just 3 hours later, another press release announced Stephanie's temporary leave of absence from her executive position at Reynolds Enterprises for personal reflection. The speed with which Mason's perfect life was unraveling matched the swiftness with which he had once dismantled Gabriella's. "Mommy, why are so many people taking your picture?" Sophia asked as they navigated through the hotel lobby, where several photographers had gathered despite security's efforts. "Because Mommy's company made a big announcement yesterday," Gabriella explained, keeping her voice light as they were escorted to their waiting car. "People are excited about our new technology." Back in New York the following day, Gabriella maintained the children's normal routine: school, afternoon activities, dinner, and bedtime stories, while managing the corporate aftermath of the Chicago revelation. Her office at Genesis became a command center for finalizing the merger details and responding to the avalanche of media attention. The pile of interview requests remained unanswered, while the folder marked Reynolds, containing acquisition documents for the 3 subsidiaries, took priority. Gabriella worked methodically, compartmentalizing the personal aspects of the situation while focusing on the business opportunity at hand. A week after Tech Summit, Layla entered her office with an unusual expression. "Ms. Johnson, Mason Reynolds has called every day this week. He's on hold again. Says it's urgent." Gabriella paused, considering. She had expected this persistence but had hoped for more time to process the confrontation herself. "Put him through," she finally said, steeling herself. "Gabriella, please." Mason's voice sounded unrecognizable, stripped of the arrogance that had once been his defining characteristic. "5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. In person. The park near your office. I need to see you. And them." Her immediate instinct was refusal, but something in his broken tone gave her pause. Perhaps providing absolute closure would be beneficial for everyone involved. "Tomorrow, 1 o'clock. Just me, Mason. The children won't be there." The following day, Gabriella arrived at the designated corner of Central Park precisely on time. Mason was already waiting on a bench, his appearance shocking in its deterioration. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his normally impeccable attire looked slept in. The controlled, commanding presence he had cultivated throughout his career had evaporated, leaving behind a man visibly coming undone. "Thank you for coming," he said, standing as she approached. I didn't know about the children, I swear. Peterson, my attorney then, never showed me the notification. He thought he was protecting me." "Convenient," Gabriella replied, maintaining her distance. "But irrelevant now. I want to know them, Gabriella. They're my children too. Biologically, yes. But you renounced the right to be a father when you threw me out pregnant, remember? An obstacle to my success. Your exact words." Mason ran his hand through his hair, now visibly graying at the temples. "I was a different person then. Arrogant, stupid, cruel. And now?" Gabriella challenged. "Now that I'm a billionaire and your company is in crisis, suddenly you remember you have children? What an extraordinary coincidence." The silence that followed was his answer. "Stephanie left me," he finally confessed. "The board is considering my removal. Everything I built is crumbling. Seems you're reaping exactly what you sowed. Gabriella, please, they have the right to know their father." She studied him with clinical detachment. "No, Mason, they have the right to a father who loves them unconditionally, who would never abandon them, who values them above everything else. You proved you're not that person." "I can change." "Perhaps, but I wouldn't risk their emotional stability to find out." Gabriella adjusted her bag on her shoulder. "Legally, you can request paternity tests and initiate proceedings. My attorneys are prepared. But consider the cost, not financial, but human. More scandals, more exposure. And for what?" "They're my children," he insisted, voice breaking. "No, Mason, they're my children. Children I fed alone, whose fevers I treated alone, whose nightmares I soothed alone. While you were building the perfect couple with Stephanie, I was building a family." He lowered his head, defeated. "What can I do then?" "Nothing. We don't need anything from you. Genesis is purchasing your subsidiaries at fair market value, not as revenge, but because it makes business sense. My children have education, healthcare, security, and love. Our life is full." "And if they ask about their father when they're older?" Gabriella sighed. "When they're old enough to understand completely, I'll tell them the truth. All of it. And they'll decide if they want to know you." As she rose to leave, Gabriella felt not anger or triumph, but a profound liberation. The diminished man before her no longer held power over her, neither emotional nor financial. "You know what's ironic, Mason? You did me a favor that rainy night. If you had stayed, perhaps I would never have discovered what I'm capable of. Perhaps I would have continued as a decorative wife to an arrogant CEO instead of the woman who became everything you said she could never be." While she walked away, leaving Mason devastated in the middle of the reception, Gabriella didn't imagine that the following morning would bring a media storm that would transform her business victory into a cultural phenomenon. catapulting her to iconic female status and completely destroying the carefully constructed image of Mason Reynolds in just 24 hours. The morning after her Central Park confrontation with Mason, Gabriella awakened to her phone vibrating itself nearly off the nightstand. 47 missed calls, hundreds of notifications, and text messages from people she hadn't heard from in years. The media storm had transformed overnight from business news to cultural phenomenon. She scrolled through headlines that seemed surreal in their intensity. The Revenge CEO, How Gabriella Johnson Built a Billion-Dollar Answer to Abandonment, and Reynolds' Empire Crumbles as Abandoned Wife Returns Triumphant. The New York Times had already published an analysis piece, The Gabriella Effect, Redefining Success in the Age of Authenticity. Reynolds Enterprises stock had plummeted 22% by market close yesterday. Pre-market trading showed another 8% drop. Institutional investors were demanding emergency meetings with the board of directors. Corporate clients were publicly reconsidering partnerships. "Mommy, your phone keeps making noise," Olivia observed, appearing in the doorway of Gabriella's bedroom in her favorite astronaut pajamas. "Just work stuff, sweetheart." Gabriella smiled, setting the phone aside. "Ready for breakfast?" As she prepared the children for school, CNBC played silently on the kitchen television. The ticker showed Reynolds Enterprises in free fall while Genesis Blackwood's stock soared. A split screen displayed Gabriella's Tech Summit presentation alongside historical footage of Mason accepting a business award 2 years earlier. The contrast was striking, her confidence versus his now apparent arrogance. "Miss Johnson, the car is here," announced the building's doorman through the intercom. She had hired additional security for the week, correctly anticipating media attention. After dropping the triplets at their private school, where the principal had been briefed to enforce strict media boundaries, Gabriella arrived at Genesis headquarters to find her team already managing the crisis that wasn't actually a crisis for them. "We've received withdrawal requests from 3 Reynolds Enterprises clients already this morning," her chief revenue officer reported during the emergency meeting. "They want to transition their contracts to our technology instead." Victor Blackwood joined via video conference, his expression one of contained satisfaction. "The board meeting to finalize the subsidiary acquisitions is still on for 3 o'clock. Our legal team suggests we proceed exactly as planned. No acceleration or changes that could be construed as capitalizing on Reynolds' misfortune." "Agreed," Gabriella nodded. "We maintain that this is strictly business." Because it is. When the meeting concluded, her PR director lingered. "The interview requests are overwhelming. Oprah's people have called twice. Should we continue declining all?" "For now," Gabriella confirmed. "This isn't about personal vindication. It's about business execution." Alone in her office, she finally allowed herself to review the full media coverage. Stephanie's calculated distancing had evolved into complete separation. A press release issued that morning announced, "After careful reflection regarding recent revelations, I have made the difficult decision to step back permanently from Reynolds Enterprises and my marriage. I was unaware of Mr. Reynolds' previous children and find the circumstances of their abandonment incompatible with my personal values." The speed of Stephanie's exit would have been breathtaking if it weren't so predictable. The woman who had participated in destroying Gabriella's marriage was now repositioning herself as an unwitting victim, a masterclass in self-preservation. Later that afternoon, the acquisition paperwork was finalized in the Genesis Blackwood boardroom. 3 subsidiaries representing 40% of Reynolds Enterprises' valuation would now operate under Gabriella's leadership. The signatures were applied with calm professionalism, belying the seismic shift they represented in the industry landscape. "Congratulations," Victor said afterward, shaking her hand firmly. "You've accomplished in 5 years what most couldn't achieve in a lifetime." "We're just getting started," Gabriella replied, her mind already moving to integration plans for the newly acquired companies. 3 days later, as the media firestorm continued unabated, Gabriella maintained her children's normal routine with fierce protectiveness. They attended school, played at the park under security's watchful eye, and remained blissfully unaware of their sudden notoriety. That evening, after tucking them into bed, she found a small envelope that had been slipped under her apartment door despite the building's enhanced security. Inside was a handwritten note from Mason. "Please, one chance to explain. For their sake, not mine." Gabriella placed the note in her desk drawer without responding. The following morning brought news that Mason had been placed on administrative leave by the Reynolds Enterprises board while they assessed the company's direction. Interim leadership had been appointed, none of them allies from Mason's inner circle. 1 week after Tech Summit, the Wall Street Journal published a devastating profile. The Fall of Mason Reynolds, How Arrogance and Cruelty Collapsed an Empire. Former employees, emboldened by his weakened position, shared stories of his cutthroat management style and dismissive treatment of subordinates. The pattern was clear. The cruelty Gabriella had experienced wasn't an aberration, but his standard operating procedure. Her phone rang that evening with a number she didn't recognize. "Gabriella," Mason's voice sounded hollow. "They've suspended me. The board vote was unanimous." She said nothing, waiting. "Everything I built is gone," he continued. "The company, Stephanie, my reputation, everything." "That must be difficult," she finally replied, her tone neutral. "I deserve it," he admitted, the words seemingly forced from somewhere deep. "Not just for what I did to you, but for who I've been to everyone. His voice broke. "I just wish I could meet them. Just once." Gabriella closed her eyes, considering. "Send me a formal letter stating your intentions. My lawyers will review it." 3 months after the Tech Summit revelation, the business world had adjusted to its new reality. The Genesis-Blackwood merger was fully implemented, with the acquired Reynolds subsidiaries rebranded and integrated. Industry publications that had once featured Mason prominently now showcased Gabriella's leadership philosophy. Fortune magazine published a profile titled "The Phoenix of Manhattan: How Gabriella Johnson Redefined Success and Power." Mason had officially resigned from Reynolds Enterprises, accepting a settlement package substantially below his contract's value. The company announced a strategic restructuring that financial analysts recognized as damage control. In her new office on the top floor of the Genesis building in Midtown, Gabriella surveyed the Manhattan skyline, the city Mason had so often disparaged for its connection to her Bronx origins. Behind her desk hung a framed photograph of herself and the triplets at the new headquarters ribbon cutting, their faces radiant with uncomplicated joy. Her phone rang with the school confirming her attendance at next week's science fair, where Aiden would present his first solar energy project. The previous year, when they turned 5, she had established trust funds for each child, ensuring their future regardless of market fluctuations or business reversals. In her desk drawer lay Mason's latest communication, a formal request to meet the children, accompanied by a letter of apology. She hadn't yet responded. Perhaps someday, when the triplets were older, when they could understand the complexities of adults and their failings. Perhaps. For now, Gabriella was occupied living the present she had built from the ashes of abandonment. An empire, yes, but more importantly, a family. The man who had discarded her as insufficient now watched from afar the legacy that might have been his, separated not by revenge but by the natural consequence of his own choices. On her desk, a new contract awaited her signature, the acquisition of the Reynolds Enterprises headquarters building. Not out of vengeance, but because the building had excellent location and good market value following its recent devaluation. Poetic justice, perhaps, but primarily good business. She signed the document with the Mont Blanc pen she had purchased for herself the day Genesis reached its first million in profits. On her wrist, not a brand-name watch meant to impress others, but a handmade bracelet crafted by Sophia, with colorful beads and a small charm reading, "Supermom." "Ms. Johnson," her assistant interrupted, "your presence is requested in the conference room. The executives from the former Reynolds Green Tech are eager to meet their new CEO. Gabriella smiled, adjusting her blazer. Tell them I'm on my way. We have a lot of work to do. The empire that Mason had considered impossible for a girl from the Bronx didn't just exist. It was redefining the future of sustainable energy, and the children he had never known would be the heirs to a legacy built not on revenge but on resilience, determination, and the unconditional love of a mother who refused to be defined by abandonment. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.